patrons.
Hey, patrons. We were just talking about the amount of resources and effort and technology that is spent on sex toys.
Was such a good delivery. This is true.
It's
I mean,
like
it's
it,
it
and
is
it
an
it's a huge industry.
yeah, it's an important and thriving industry.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I now it makes me wonder how much money is in the sex industry. Like how much is estimated to be in it.
Sex toys specifically, or sex work more generally.
Uh um Sex toys specifically.
Um, yeah, I also would be curious to know.
Annually about $34 billion.
That seems like a lot of dollars.
It's a lot of dollars for a lot of things that look the same.
Is that net or gross?
That was in 2021. Yahoo Finance says global sex toys market size to surpass 75.73 billion by 2030.
Wow. Sounds like we
So
need to
give
get in
it
on the ground floor.
yeah. What would be like, how would we even market a why we do what we do sex toy? Like what would it do? Like it would just be like it would debunk orgasms. Or like like I just think of like all the things it could or would do.
We'll start calling them how we do what we do.
Yeah, I like yeah, that $34 billion in 2021 was from December 18th of last year. So that's a pretty
Mm,
up to date statistic.
okay.
A lot of money.
That's all. That's a lot. That's some dollars there. Anyway,
We're not even talking about that today. That just came up as a
yeah,
conversation.
yeah.
Um,
So yeah, not what we're talking about for the episode. What we're talking about with each other.
yeah, yeah. This is as friends do. We are talking about right to work. So we're gonna dive into that and get into some union busting shit.
Oh, by the way, how was your birthday?
It was good. It was quiet. I can't complain much because I worked most of the day, and then the next day we went to dinner
Hmm.
with some family. So it was good. Apparently everybody knows that I like books, so they just got me a bunch of gift cards to go get books, and last night I ordered like 10 brand new books. So I'm really excited about that.
Woe is Shane.
Yeah, I got this book I just learned about that apparently it's like this like kind of like weird cosmic horror book where this person a black hole opens in their basement and they're not sure what it is, so they put their hand in it and hijinks ensue, I guess. Um so there was another one that is like this weird body horror book apparently that a mom loses their son, and before he has his organs donated, or like before he's screaming or something, she cuts a piece of his lung away and keeps it and feeds it, and it starts growing. So it's like strange. Like it's just weird creepy stuff like that. So got a couple
Wild.
of those. Got a
Sounds like a
couple
Black
Behavior
Mirror
Analysis
episode.
books. Yeah, I know. It does. It's a little bit unsettling. Um and got a couple art books that I was looking to get, and so yeah, I'm excited to see I'm excited for those to come in. So there's supposed to be some coming in today.
Cool. Well, I'm excited for
Yeah.
you
Yeah, thanks.
and all your books.
I'm an old man now.
Hey.
Take it back.
Younger than me.
Just barely.
Um, all right, let's see here. What was I gonna do? I don't remember. Oh, I'm so tired. All right. I thought I had something else to tell you about something in there. Oh, you reminded me of this movie. Or no, it wasn't a movie. It was another book that I had read, like a sci-fi book when I was in like middle school, and I'm not even sure I'd be able to find it again. Um, I don't remember why I read it either, but it was about a guy who, for some reason, like some kind of singularity occurs in the shed in their backyard or something like that. And this kid decides, for whatever reason, he's gonna go basically stay in the shed.
Okay.
And so I think they got the time dilation flipped backwards in the book because I think what happened is he goes in there and he comes out, and for everybody else it's been like a few hours, and for him it's been like 10 years. And
Okay.
so he like spent the whole time basically just like exercising and like getting all buff. So he has like a twin brother and walks out of the thing, and he's like 5 years older than 10 years older than his brother and all like buff.
Interesting.
Yeah. So I don't remember exactly anything else about the book or if that's even remotely accurate to the story, but that's the memory I have of the story. Um, the black hole thing you said reminded me of that.
There's a storyline in Invincible in the Invincible comics
Hmm.
where one of the characters and his partner get pulled into this dimension, and there's like a time issue where like on Earth, like for every like so long they're on Earth, it's like several years. And so they ended up being in this other universe for like 400 years, but they were
Uh,
only gone for like a couple months. But in that time frame, like the main character like becomes the emperor of this planet and like takes it over as their ruler and like fixes everything. And then also like and everybody's like, oh, this guy's great, he's so wonderful. And then you find out that he's like plotting and sabotaging and doing all the things that people in power do.
sure.
And like it's like this really great villain turn for this person that you don't see coming.
Wow.
And it like it's such a great little fold in that, because when he comes back he's like, no, I'm not tolerating these aliens coming to our planet anymore and putting us in danger. So
Yeah.
I don't know if you ever read Invincible, or I know we talked about the show, but like I think it's so great that the main alien villains all have Tom Selleck mustaches. I think that's so funny to me. Like that was like a point that they made of that, of
Yeah.
like all the male Viltrumites have Tom Selleck mustaches.
That's hilarious.
That's so good.
Um, that's really funny. That sounds cool. I like that.
Yeah, it was a great little arc in that.
Yeah.
Besides all the other things that happen.
I think I tend to like time warpy type things like that.
Oh, then you might like that book Recursion by Blake Crouch.
I don't know this one. I don't think.
So it is. Let me grab it real quick. Hold on. So I got it on a whim. Um, this was I got like, so I joined this book club called the Book of the Month Club, and that's what it looks
Cool.
like.
Oprah's Book of the
And
Month Club.
so yeah, and I just picked it up and I was like, oh, that's weird. So the synopsis is that's what New York memory makes reality. That's what New York City cop Barry Sutton is learning as he investigates a devastating phenomenon the media has dubbed false memory syndrome, a mysterious affliction that drives its victims mad with memories of a life they never lived. That's what neuroscientist Helena Smith believes. It's why she's dedicated her life to creating technology that will let us preserve our most precious memories. If she succeeds, anyone will be able to re-experience the first kiss, the birth of a child, the final moment with a dying parent. As Barry searches for the truth, comes face to face with an opponent more terrifying than any disease, a force that attacks not just our minds, but the very fabric of the past. And as its effects begin to unmake the world as we know it, only he and Helena working together, will stand a chance to defeating it. So basically, it's memory, but it's also like this weird time travel thing that happens, and it's really fascinating. Basically, the person is able to, it's not like really spoilery, but like the person is able to like kind of like almost set up checkpoints in their life, and then something will happen and they'll die, and then they'll be sent back to this other time. Like it's real interesting.
Sort of like that movie or that TV show Devil's Hour.
Oh, I never saw that one.
Is pretty good. But it also reminds me of Ready Player Two, that book.
Oh
Did you read that
yeah,
one?
yes I did.
Yeah, like, where they like the ability to relive other people's experiences, and it like
Yeah,
you get like all the same sensations they had.
yeah. that one. I was so bummed that that one wasn't as good as Ready Player One, but Ready Player One was such a unique, fun thing. Like, I don't know if they
Yeah.
couldn't have done anything better than that, you know?
Yeah, I don't think without just straight retelling the story that they would have been able to exactly capture that magic. But I mean, I don't know. I could be wrong, but I don't know. I definitely liked the book, but you're right. Like it did not do Ready Player One level business.
No, I thought it was a cool twist, but it wasn't like I mean, it was good. It was still worth the read if you like that world, you know?
Right. The nostalgic masturbation
Yeah.
world.
Yeah. I mean, that's exactly what it was. It was like just
Yeah.
like, oh, are you a child of the 80s and 90s? Watch this. Here's
Yeah.
everything that you could ever love in this place. So,
I'm gonna
uh,
stroke your nostalgia stiffy so hard.
do you like arcades? Do you fuck about arcades?
Um, cool. Recursion.
Yeah,
All right.
Recursion's cool. It was a great read.
I just finished reading Neil deGrasse Tyson's Astrophysics for People in a Hurry.
How was that?
It was good. Did you ever read oh shit, what's it called? There was some book. I want to say it was by like Stephen Hawking or someone. I don't remember, but it was some book that was like a primer on science. Oh, well, Cosmos did this basically. It was
Yeah.
like it was like a very very mini version of Cosmos. It's a novella, like it's really small,
Okay.
but that's basically what it was. So like it was I love science things. I love nerdy things. I like space. And I like Neil deGrasse Tyson, so like it wasn't the most gripping thing I've ever read in my life, but it was cool.
Okay. I read a few years ago, somebody got me a book that was about how planets are made.
Mm.
And it was super fascinating, but I was like, I could see that this is not going to be a bestseller because people don't want to read about like ice and gases coming together and like superheated rock and how that all turns into like life-sustaining rocks in the universe, you know?
I want to hear it. I want to read that.
Oh, it was really interesting. It was like it talks about like how these dwarf planets start showing up and like how like it's basically just like planets pull themselves together essentially.
Right. Yeah. And
So
often it's just like clumps of things crashing into another clump of thing until the big clump just gets clumpier over time.
yeah, it's Katamari essentially. It's Katamari until we showed up and now we have to work, you know?
Yeah.
It's all chaos and then we invented society. We're the worst.
Oh, I kind of thought doing chaos theory might be fun sometime.
Yeah, that will be a blast.
We've got unions, chaos theory. I've had so many ideas for episodes lately, and I just keep forgetting to write them down. But oh, so one of them I was just telling you the like top 10 things that what was it?
That sound good but are the worst.
Yes, the sound good or the worst. The other one I was thinking would be cool was a sort of top 10 of like world changing inventions that people don't even sort of know exist.
Okay.
So and the reason I was thinking of this one, this is so dumb, but so we have to replace the wax seal under our toilet downstairs.
Okay.
And I don't know if you've ever done that, but to do that, you have to turn off the water supply to the toilet, flush it as many times as you can to get the water out of it because you're gonna have to pull it off the floor.
Right.
And then to really make sure you've gotten all the water out of it, they have these like super absorbent little beads you can pour into it, and they'll basically just like sponges. They'll just soak up whatever water's in there, but then they'll form like a solid mass. So
Okay.
that it's almost like a jelly kind of, so you could scrape it out pretty easily, but water won't go flying everywhere.
Yeah.
And then that way you can pick up toilet and move it. And you don't have to worry about water getting all over the floor and destroying the subfloor and getting all over you. And it's gross and it's
Sure.
sticky and it sucks. Anyways, and I was like, it's one of those really clever inventions where I was like, this completely probably changed things for all plumbers when they came up with this. And like
Sure.
nobody knows about this thing. So I was just thinking these like really simple, really clever tools that exist that people often don't know about.
Yeah, I think that'd be really fun actually. Like those would be like looks like a fun mini to be like here are like five like really strange inventions that you
Yeah.
probably don't know about but have changed your entire life.
Yes. Oh, I was thinking about talking about the invention of something too. I don't remember what it was though. Maybe the typewriter.
Lego makes a working typewriter now.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is,
Like you can build it. It's crazy.
if I build it, will they come?
And Lego's like, we'll how many studs do you want in this? We'll put all the studs in it. We're gonna build this cool thing.
That's wild.
It's absurd, dude. Like Lego's such an absurd, ridiculous company. Like it's amazing to see like what they're doing.
Yeah.
Except the fact that
They
they're tied with BP. So like that's a different problem. Like
right.
because there's a lot of plastic.
There's a lot of plastic. I feel like I've heard that they're the largest tire manufacturer in the world.
They are, yeah. They produce more tires annually than any other company in the world.
That's pretty funny.
What a strange accolade to have as a toy company.
Right? Yeah, it is. All right.
So
I
odd.
think um I think we're good to go. When does this publish? You already got the date somehow.
I just assumed it was the week after the last one we recorded.
That makes sense.
So it's coming out on Valentine's Day.
So 2/14.
Yeah, that's what I had.
Right. I just want to make sure also that I had my date right because sometimes I forget what day Valentine's Day is on.
Yeah, it's not. It's a day.
And somehow I'm still married. Just kidding.
Hey, me too. Funny how that works.
I have been better at managing to remember. Well, actually, no. I've always been really good at remembering our anniversary. It's Lauren that forgets.
How rude.
But certain holidays I'm not as good at. Okay.
All right.
I need a gallon of coffee.
I'll get it. I'll send it your way through
Thanks.
the rain and sleet and snow.
Oh yeah, how's the weather down there?
Oh, it's beautiful. It's 52 degrees today. It's sunny. The skies are blue. I can't complain.
Fair.
I try to never complain about weather in Florida because we don't have snow. So I'm like, why would I ever complain about living here? It's amazing.
I imagine you've seen some of the pictures from around the country this last week. Yeah,
Yeah,
so they were brutal.
it's yeah. That's like I feel bad for so many folks. I'm like, I wish I could send some sunshine to you all because we have it all. Apparently, we kept it all this
Yeah,
time.
we got record snowfall here. It actually wasn't a record amount, it was record speed. It was like 6 inches in less than an hour. It was so fast.
That's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, it was just dumping snow. There was a incredible amount of accidents, but
Do you have your
oh,
power back?
yeah. It ended up staying out for about a day and a half.
Okay.
But it was wild. Like it was just us with power because of our generator. You just look around and it was like for a whole day and a half, everything's just dark everywhere. I was like, that's hardcore. For some people, their heat is tied to that. So if they don't have power, like what are they doing? Like it's 30 degrees
Right.
outside. They're huddling in blankets or something. Um, so
I mean, I would be anyway.
yeah. Okay. Feeling good?
I'm feeling good.
Okay. Let's get the summer started.
Yay.
Okay. I'll count us in. Oh, also, did you happen to notice at all last time we were recording that I like got really staticky a couple of times?
I did not notice that.
Okay. For some reason on the recording, it came through as really staticky and broken up. And so what I did three things. One is I went and just pushed all the cords in to make sure that they were fully connected. The other thing I did is I turned the gain down slightly on my microphone because I was starting to peak a little bit. And the third thing that I did is I have been using the same file as a template for our episodes for years. And
Sure.
I think that that whole weird thing it was doing where I would record something and it would just create an infinite loop of that thing. It has been doing that so much. And it even started doing a weird thing where I'd hit record and rather what it would do is it would all of a sudden show audio as if I had recorded and show me recording over it, but it would delete it as it went along. It was super bizarre. And
Weird.
so I decided to just scrap that template and just start a totally brand new unrelated one. And
Okay.
those three things seem to have solved it. But if you do happen to notice that it sounds like I'm getting all staticky, just let me know because I want to make sure
Okay.
that I catch it so that Justin doesn't email me on Thursday saying, "Hey, I need you to record like 10 minutes of audio for this episode."
Sure. Yeah, I think if I notice that I or like if I catch it, I will definitely let you know.
Thank you.
Of course.
Okay. Now I'm ready to count us in.
All right.
Okay. Three, two, one, go. Welcome to Why We Do What We Do. I am your very wealthy CEO host, Abraham.
And I'm your wishing I could join a union host, Shane.
Or Psychology Podcast. We talk about the things that people do and animals do and the work that people do and how they try and use different systems to best support their work, I guess.
Yes. And so in our series of random episodes that we talk about work in general, this is one that we're gonna kind of dive into some of the policy and procedure around how working might work.
You could maybe loosely sort of categorize this inside of our organizational OBM type discussions a little,
Sure.
but this it's fairly tangential, I think, only insofar as it refers to the kinds of policies that that loosely might exist in an organization, and I think further does speak a little bit to the kinds of motivations and incentives that exist in a workspace. But I guess mostly this is a political episode, maybe.
Yeah, that's probably I think that's probably more accurate for sure.
Yeah. All right, very good. Well, anyway, if you're joining us for the first time and you'd like to support what we do, you can head over to our website. You can pick up some merch. You can join us on Patreon. You can like and subscribe, leave a rating and review. You can start a union and call it the Why We Do What We Do Union. And
So why we do what
and
we crew.
yeah, and we can salute you from a distance because I don't know what your work is, but I'll talk more about the ways that you can support us at the end of this discussion. First, before we dive into our topic today, I'd like to thank you for joining me on this Valentine's Day. Happy Valentine's Day,
Yeah.
Shane.
Happy Valentine's Day, Abraham. We love you. Um, it's also Ash Wednesday, so don't freak out if you see people with smudges on their faces.
Yeah, I think I mentioned on this podcast before the first time I like because I had never seen the black cross on the forehead until I was in my mid 20s. And all of a sudden one day people are just walking around with
Uh-huh.
these black smudges on their face. And I was like, was there like a fire somewhere? And people like are just kind of going about their day now. Like what happened?
Yeah,
Um,
it's an interesting thing. I don't think I
it's a whole
noticed it
thing.
until I was an adult either, and I was like, "What is happening?"
Yeah. Yeah. Maybe I just didn't notice, but it's also Frederick Douglass Day, so go read you some Frederick Douglass.
Yep, he had a tiny bed. Um, well, I got to do
Oh,
a
I heard
tour of
that.
his house when I was a kid. And he had a tiny bed. He slept sitting up, apparently.
Ah,
It's also League of Women Voters Day.
oh, that sounds good.
Yeah.
This is Library Lovers Day, so Shane falls in that camp.
Oh yeah, big fan. Libraries are so important.
Yes.
I also it's a National Condom Awareness Day. I guess that lines up with Valentine's Day pretty well.
Yeah, and Library Lovers Day. What does the lovers part mean there?
Ooh.
Also, National Cream Filled Chocolates Day. So maybe that's related to.
Nice, real nice. I did see that Easter candy is coming out, and so Cadbury eggs are back, and
Okay.
I'm just such a just it's a weakness of mine. It's my kryptonite. I will eat so many Cadbury cream eggs. Um, It's a real problem. It's also National Donor Day. So, like, it makes sense because it's Valentine's Day, so you give someone your heart.
It's the last thing you'll ever do, but it's so nice. Um,
Sentiment
it's
is
Pet
nice.
Theft Awareness Day. Don't steal people's pets. That's
Yeah,
don't
that's
do
not
that.
nice.
That's bad.
That's so mean. It's Read to Your Child Day, which I think lines up with Library Lovers Day, hopefully.
I would yeah, I would hope so. Alzheimer's disease and dementia staff education week. So remember
So
remember
specific.
this week.
Yes. It's also a celebration of Love Week. Um, I guess just they're gonna extend Valentine's Day for a couple more days.
Yeah, it's Valentine's week. Um, it is getting dizzy week. Um, so
Hmm.
yeah, dizzy with love.
Dizzy with love. And then the last but not least is that it's Love Data Week,
Ooh, I love data.
which we both like that one.
I feel the love and loving the data. Anyway, we're not a podcast about days to celebrate things. Instead, we are a podcast about the psychology of what people do. And one of the things that people do is they go out and they like become politicians, and then they make laws, and they make laws that say what kinds of things people can and can't do. And sometimes they'll make laws that say what they can and can't do as part of their employment. And we
Yes.
and so as I said, politics is human behavior. Therefore, politic things are under our umbrella. Not that it would have stopped us if it wasn't, but here we are.
Yes. So today we are going to talk about the idea of right to work laws and right to work states and what that does to humans and human behavior and different systems that we operate in. There we are going to kind of talk about some of the policies for and against right to work laws and what that looks like. And just as kind of a fair heads up, we have our own opinions about
Right?
things. What we're going to do is we're going to try to do our best to be fair, and try to do our best to make sure that we are sharing both sides of the argument. But I will, we kind of had this conversation before the show started. Our general views are typically pro union.
Yeah.
So that is going to come out a little bit. The discussion around unions is going to be an entirely different episode at some point in time because that's in itself worth unpacking. But I just want to kind of give everybody that fair heads up before we dive into this one.
Yeah, so yeah, as you said, we're talking about right to work laws, and the implication is that that has to do with unions. And you're right, we do have to disclose up front that our bias is going to be that generally we see unions as a positive thing, and it is worth saying, up front that we understand there are caveats with certain unions and the bad things that have happened as a part of unions. But I think where we come down on this is generally unions are a thing that protects people. We are in favor of protecting people. Therefore, we're in support of unions. And I just keeping it
Yes.
as general as possible for that part of the discussion allows us to, I think, be really transparent about the biases that we have coming into this discussion. But also, as I said, what we have the platform and I think enough of a level of expertise. We're not lawyers, but we do psychology things.
Right.
That I think we can come in and we can have a nuanced discussion about this without necessarily landing on a firm conclusion and just sort of say like let's really carefully weigh out the pros and cons and let's talk about what's happening in these systems.
Absolutely. So today, it's also worth mentioning that this is a US centric topic.
Yeah.
A lot of the laws and the policies and things that we're going to talk about are specific to the US. So we are going to talk about this idea of right to work. So we are going to talk about what it is, what it isn't, where it came from, and where it's possibly going.
Yes. Okay. So, ready to just dive right into this?
Let's do it.
All right, we've already given, I think, a pretty good kickoff, so I think we're already rolling a bit. But to make
Yeah.
sure we're really clear on giving the background on what right to work laws are. Now, it's despite what the name sounds like, these are not laws that insist that every person has the right to work. That is actually not what they're saying. That's not part of the thesis here. They are
Right.
not laws that guarantee your right to work. There are other laws that do that, but the ones that are called right to work laws, they are actually not saying everybody has an equal right to work. That's not what they do.
Right.
They are also not laws that protect your employment of any kind. Kind of. We will get to that. But they are, in a sense, not laws that protect your employment. We'll unpack the sort of pros and cons of these laws, and that you can maybe make the case that they do protect employment in a way. But just in principle, that's not what they do as the function of that law.
Right. So, right to work laws, RTW laws, are laws that are state laws specifically that intend to protect the quote right of every American to work for a living without being compelled to belong to a union, end quote. And that comes from the National Right to Work Legal Defense Fund. So, another clear definition says that, or it states that quote I'm sorry, quote beep, quote a right to work state is one that has passed state legislation stipulating that no individual can be forced as a condition of employment to join or pay dues to a labor union. End quote. So, just to be clear, right to work laws say that somebody has the right to go to work without being forced into a union.
Yes. Okay. So that is a very important piece of the definition, understanding that these are state laws and that the state laws are intended to and states that people do not cannot be compelled to join a union as a condition of their employment at a place they're going to work. Okay. So I think we need to unpack the history of this a little bit. Just like our Pledge of Allegiance, the term right to work has been attributed to a French socialist, in this case Louis Blanc, in the mid 1800s. 1800s. However, at that time, it was in reference to the idea that people be guaranteed protection to maintain employment. So, although the way that it becomes used later, at the time that it was originated, it sort of was more like what it sounds like. It was a guarantee that
Right.
people should have equal access to employment, and so that was the sort of 1800s.
Right. So the more contemporary use of the term, however, has been attributed to a conservative lobbyist named Vance Muse, which is a hell of a name.
Right?
Um, like there's sometimes you hear a name and you're like, wow, that is a name. It's like Max Power, the name that you that you want to touch, but you mustn't touch.
Yes.
So I don't know if you probably don't watch enough Simpsons to know that Homer changed his name to Max Power at some point
I
in
did
time.
not know
And
that.
he had a theme song.
Oh
Um,
no. Well, this
yeah,
is
that was the lyric. So
amazing.
yeah, it was Max Power, the name that you want to touch, but you mustn't touch. That's how he sang that. Um,
That's great.
so so anyway, Vance Muse is the conservative lobbyist who's kind of linked to the term right to work as we know it today.
Yes. And he was also nicknamed the Big Fink by labor
Ugh,
unions. Um, he really dressed the part of the Texan and was very outspoken. And he as a fun background on him, he liked to agitate people. He was a pot
sure.
stirrer, if you will. And he was directly quoted as saying, quote, "I am a Southerner and I am for white supremacy," end quote. So
Oh,
if that tells you a lot about him very quickly, then worth having the background on him, because he's really not the point of this discussion. But I think as part of understanding the development of these laws, knowing the kinds of people who were pushing for them the hardest
yeah.
is useful.
You should know who's on what team, I
Yeah.
think.
And what team they're on before they join your team.
Yeah,
Or try
absolutely.
to. Anyway, so we've got some setup there. There are multiple starting points to the right to work laws. So it wasn't just him. It was there was multiple things coming together. Like most things, it's not just like here's a thing, here's a cause, here's an effect. It's like here's a whole bunch of conditions that came together to sort of produce the circumstance that would result in thing, in this case, right to work laws. Most
Right.
point to a 1935 act called the National Labor Relations Act, or NLRA, and this act did several things. It was a lot of these bills, if you read them, they're massive. But chief among the things that it did do, for the purpose of this discussion, it specified that employees have certain inalienable, that's the word I'm looking for, inalienable rights, and that those rights included the ability to join or form a union where none exists or dismantle one that is no longer favored by the employees.
Okay. It's also designed to assist in union activities and that people can participate in a union even if it is unrecognized by the employer. So I think that's an important piece too.
It also specified that employees have the right to be represented by a union, and they have the right to strike and engage in collective bargaining for the members of the union.
Right. And they also have a right to criticize the union or union leaders without retribution or retaliation too. And they have the right to engage in non-union activities.
Yeah, and they can choose to do none of the union things. They can choose to basically just not be a part of any of it. So there is the act was set up to have all of these guarantees. It also means that employees are free from certain things. So that was a list of things they're free to do. A list of things they're free from is that they should be free from a threat for threats due to not participating in a union, and meaning that they should not be threatened about their decision to not join a union if they chose not to. They should also they are free from being questioned about their union participation by their employee or employer, meaning that an employer cannot go, snooping around and investigating and asking employees if they are in or planning to join a union.
Right. They are also free from fines or restrictions or privileges due to choice of joining a union or not. So they cannot be fined or restricted or have privileges reduced because of their either engagement or non-engagement in that union.
Right.
And they are free from excessive surveillance by employers. So employers can't watch this person more because they are part of a union or because they're not part of a union. They can't change their procedures around how they observe their employees because of that.
Yeah, and part of this was that there was a fear, a correctly assumed fear, because this absolutely happens and has happened, is that if employers are concerned that a union is forming, they will like put in all kinds of surveillance to try and detect and then prevent that union from forming. We'll talk a little bit more about that kind of thing later. But that was part of what this law was intended to do, was prevent employers from having excessive amounts of surveillance over their employees. And I'm sure that like this is somewhat profession specific. So like someone who is, for example, guarding a diamond vault, they probably have some kinds of provision where they can have a lot of surveillance of that employee because they're guarding an enormous amount of assets. And
Right.
so like they probably, I'm sure that there are caveats or systems by which people can have high amounts of security when they need high amounts of security. It just means that they shouldn't. It's so I think what it is like, is it justifiable levels of surveillance? And I
Right.
think that an employer just has to be able to make the case that it is, and in many cases it will be, right? But it just can't be excessive.
Right. And one thing that this law does not do, this act that we're talking about, we talked about the employees' freedoms and their choices, what they are free, what they're supposed to be free from, but none of the stuff that we're talking about has to do with ads.
Nice. I was hoping you were teeing that up.
Thanks. That's what I was trying to do.
All right, so we've been getting into this act so that we can clearly understand the history of the conditions that sort of led to the formation of unions, understand what the laws that were in place at the formation of these unions, but also what the laws don't do.
Right. So what the act did not do was prevent employment being dependent on an agreement to join a labor union. That's really, really important underneath this. So this means that workers could be compelled to join a union and thus pay. I'm sorry, couldn't be, right?
No,
Workers could not be.
the original
Oh,
version of this did allow that to be the case.
okay. All right. So this means that workers could be compelled to join a union and thus pay union fees or else not be hired at that workplace. Which sounds a little bit I don't know, like a little bit coercive.
Yeah, and not that every union was going to do this, or in fact that many even did. I don't have those numbers exactly. Just that they could do that, but that doesn't mean that they did do that very often, if at all, or like how extensive it
Right.
was. But there was a concern that that would be a thing, and it seems like at least in some instances that did happen somewhere. But I don't think that that was even the norm. Again, I don't have the numbers exactly. But an important thing is that that was a concern. There was whether or
Right.
not that was the effect, the concern was that the law enabled that. And so in 1947, there was a Taft-Hartley amendment that altered the language such that in states that passed such laws, employees could not be forced to join a union and thus pay union dues is a very important part of that. So
Right.
they could not be forced to join a union and pay union dues as a condition of their employment. And so this 1947 Taft-Hartley Amendment, it essentially made it that states could then put in right to work laws in their state. So this is not that amendment does not make it a national law. It gave states the rights to make their own laws about this.
Right, right, right. So of course, it had to be one of my relatives that's causing this ruckus. Um, I'm like related to Taft somewhere very, very far down the line somehow.
That's who it
So,
was. I couldn't remember who you said.
um, yeah, it's that guy. The one that's buried in the National Cathedral in a giant tomb. Um, Now, more than half of the U.S. states, 27, to be specific, so 27 states have passed right to work laws, and in the U.S. territory of Guam specifically. But most, not all, hence the word most, of these states are considered Southern. So that's also something to be mindful of too. Before we get into that, I think it is probably worth unpacking the arguments for and against right to work laws and kind of what people are saying in this discussion.
Should I read like the list of the states that have joined, or just give a
Um,
few?
I think we could probably give a few.
Yeah, I mean, so one that's not Southern is Nevada. Nevada has the right to work laws. Also South Dakota. Although I think you certainly put them in the conservative belt. Um,
Yeah.
but there's South Carolina, Texas, Utah. Utah's not Southern either. Virginia, Mississippi, Louisiana. Also North Dakota, Michigan. So it's Arkansas, Arizona, Alabama. So like there are a lot of southern states in there, but it kind of it follows the middle of the country for specific reasons.
Right. Right. That's fair.
Um, all right, but as we said, we should unpack essentially what the arguments that people who are pro right to work are making. And again, this is why I want this to be a nuanced conversation and paint both sides really fairly because I don't want to misrepresent their arguments at all. I want this to be as genuine as it can be.
Right. So most advocates of right to work laws argue that these laws do a few things. One, that they protect the workers' right to choose gainful employment, but to not participate in a union, to not pay union dues or fees. They also make the argument that these laws protect the workers' right to join a union without compulsion.
Sorry, I was looking at something else.
Okay.
Um, They also argue that these laws protect the workers' right to leave a union without any kind of threats to their overall employment. If they, for whatever reason, think that that union does not represent them anymore or they don't want to participate.
Right. And they also state that these laws reduce the tax and spend policies that happen in Washington.
All right. We'll have to unpack that one a little bit later, I'm thinking. But that's essentially a case that they explicitly made was that the states that do not have, or that the right to work states essentially quell the problem of tax and spend policies. Let's just leave it at
Right.
that for now.
Absolutely.
Okay. In one study in Oklahoma, they did so this again, we're talking about the pros here. We're talking about the people arguing for right to work laws. So there's several studies where people are sort of are have argued about what are all the important and reasonable metrics that we could look at to see whether right to work states have a positive impact. And there's many ways you could slice that, right? There's a lot of
Sure.
ways that you could look at the data. There's lots of different data to look at. There are many choices you make to try and make that. One of them is that they argue that the people who are against right to work laws say, well, if you this weakens unions, so there will be fewer unions. Well, in
Right.
one study in Oklahoma, they point to the fact that data show that union membership didn't change after the state enacted right to work laws. So they didn't have the right to work laws, then they did. Union membership stayed about the same. And this indicates that people were able to choose to maintain memberships in their unions, and they decided to do so. And the state is sort of saying, yeah, fine. Like, we just wanted you to have the choice. And now you do, and you chose to keep doing that thing. That's fine. That's up to you. And so that's kind
Right.
of the argument that they're making here, is saying that, like, it's not necessarily the case that labor union participation will decrease. And so they're like, we're just getting our point across that what we want to support is workers' rights.
Sure. Other right to work advocates have also pointed to the idea that if companies are not spending as much money because a union isn't forcing them to, then they can and will pay employees a higher salary. So, said another way, if companies are able to save money on what they would describe as unnecessary union grievances, then that money that would be spent on those concerns would be going back to the employees for higher salaries for their work.
Yeah, basically. And this one's more in the camp of hypotheticals, because the other one I said was a study. This is not a study. This is this is them instead
Yeah.
saying that, like, you don't need a union. Not only will you make less money because we can't afford to pay you, but it'll cost you more money, right? And so they're sort of saying, like, people will end up making more money in the right to work under right to work policies. The right to work advocates have also pointed to the idea that if companies are not, oh, I was read the same one. Also, if companies have to spend money on employees, in more money on employees in right to work states. Hold on, what?
I think you're on the last bullet point.
Yeah, well, this is the bullet I'm on, but I read it.
Oh wait.
I wrote something wrong here. They have to spend more money on employees in right to work states. It means they'll be able to. Oh, they don't have to spend more money. Okay,
Oh right.
I was
Okay,
like, I was
sorry.
missing a negation in there. Okay, um, beep. It also means that if companies don't have to spend more money on employees in these right to work states, presumably because they're dealing with unions, essentially, that they'll be able to hire more people, which means that there's generally more employment to go around. Like, that's a logical sort of conclusion that they're reaching.
Right. And then finally, if employees aren't having their wages garnished by paying union fees, that means they have more after tax income that they can spend on things that increase their standards of living. So, therefore, people in right to work states enjoy a higher standard of living. Again, that's one of the arguments here.
Yes. So we're not espousing our opinions yet. We're just trying to say what they're arguing for here. I think it
Right.
is probably, I was going to wait till a little bit later to talk about the tax and spend policies, but I'm just going to go ahead and say it here because I think it's worth just understanding that part of it. And essentially what they were arguing with the tax and spend policies, what they explicitly say on their website, is
Right.
that states that don't have right to work are more likely to elect politicians who vote on large spending bills. That's essentially what they're saying. Said another way,
Uh-huh.
states that are more likely to elect a Democratic representative are also states who are not likely to have right to work laws. And therefore, they're the states that have more unions are more likely to send more Democrats to positions of power in the Senate and in the House of Representatives. And they don't like that because that obviously means that there are not as many people who are sort of on the conservative spectrum of things. So I think they loosely consider that it means overrepresentation of, like, unions in these places, I think, is maybe their concern. Again, I'm
Sure.
trying to be as charitable as I can in addressing their arguments.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I think you said that well.
Okay. Okay, so that's essentially the pros. Those are the things that they're talking about with why people are for right to work policies. So let's go ahead and dig into those counter arguments, the people who are against right to work policies.
Right. So most opponents of right to work laws argue that these laws do a few things. One, that they hamstring a union's bargaining power to advocate pay and benefits for employees. Another is that they decrease participation in unions. And another is that they lower employee income or at least prevent raises in income as part of these laws.
Sorry, I'm gonna have to we're gonna have to pause at some point. But that's okay. We're doing okay for now.
Oh, because
Okay,
we're
so you did the
going through
first
this pretty
three.
fast.
Well,
Um,
no, it was I realized now that there was the part I meant to write and I just completely forgot about. I
okay.
wanted to just get a quick glance at it. So I think we'll just have to pause in after probably this section, so I can go
Okay.
look at that really quick. It should
Yeah,
be
that's fine.
quick though. Okay.
Yeah, no worries.
Um, let's see here.
I'm on the I ended
Oh, the
on
benefits, right?
the last one I said was lower employee income.
Right.
So that's
Okay.
where I stopped.
So the opponents of the right to work laws also say that what these laws really do is benefit corporations more than they benefit workers by essentially making it a more hospitable place for the top sort of 1% of organizations than for the people who are doing most of the work sort of down below. And I think one of their biggest points in the whole criticism of right to work laws is that they enable free riders because what the right to work laws do that is not really stated in the sort of right to work thesis is that although people cannot be compelled to join a union, they do maintain access to the benefits of a union. So if they go to join a place of work, that if they choose not to join the union is still by these laws obligated to bargain on this employee's behalf. When they engage in collective bargaining, that raises all people's wages. The non-union members get to benefit as well, even though they are not participating in that union. It means
Hmm.
that they get to reap the benefits of other protections and benefits that are gained for union members, although again, they're not participating in the union. As they call them these free riders. And that's that they basically get all these benefits without having to pay union dues, without being obligated to be of service to the union, and that they're sort of saying that's not really fair to the people who are then shouldering that burden.
Right. They also argue that these laws, these white right to work laws, are necessary because the 1935 NLRA actually made it illegal to force someone to join a union as a condition of their employment. So everything beyond that law, they are arguing is or that act specifically is kind of like gilding the lily. It's like it's extra unnecessary. It's unga pachka, I think is what they say, right? It's like too much.
Yeah. Well, and essentially they're saying, I think that
It's a
yeah, it's
redundancy.
it's a redundancy, yeah, and it's like it's not actually doing what they're saying that what their thesis here is that it undermines the primary tenet of the right to work laws because the right to work laws say that people need to have the choice to be able to not join union if they don't want to and still be able to work at that job and not have their privilege, it's that they don't get fewer work hours because they're not in the union, like they don't have lower
Right.
wages because of the union, that sort of thing. And so that's essentially what they're saying. But they're sort of saying, well, that's already the case, so that's why it's unnecessary. They also express concern that one of the things that unions will do is they will specifically advocate and bargain for higher safety standards and like work conditions, their working conditions generally. And so
Right.
that what happens then is that places that do not have unions have weaker unions or have some, smaller membership in their unions, whatever's going on there. If these right to work laws affect unions from being able to do what they do, then employers will generally adopt lower safety standards, meaning that you're going to have more people who are injured in the workplace, who have adverse health issues because of their job, et cetera, et cetera. And so they're sort of making the case that rights to work laws make it harder for people to have safe working conditions.
Sure. I think, you know, I could see and we're gonna talk more about like some examples of this, but I could see some examples of that happening, right? Where it's like if you don't
Right.
have somebody holding you accountable, then then you're not gonna do the thing that is required of you.
Yeah. So, let's see here. Okay. Um, there was supposed to be sort of a bulleted summary list of sort of reasons or arguments, but there I think there's more to expand upon. And wouldn't you like to know what that is? But first, you have to listen to ads.
Wouldn't you like to know?
um, our union says we can come back from the ads. Um,
Yay!
but let's further elaborate on some of the claims here for the opponents of right to work laws.
Right. So many critics point to the fact that there are many studies and analyses that have shown that no matter how you look at the data, employees in states with right to work laws make less money than states without right to work laws. That is to say, wages are higher in states without right to work laws in every possible way to aggregate and average the data. So their argument is that no matter how you spin it, no matter how you analyze it, no matter how you massage it, right to work states have a lower wage for employees than non right to work states.
Yes. And so one of the arguments that was made in favor of right to work states is that like, well, employers will be able to pay their employees more. And the the critics point out like, well, but that's not what's happening. um,
Right.
like here are the data. Every piece of data from every place that we've ever gathered it shows conclusively, definitively, and at 100% of the time that in right to work states wages are lower.
Right.
Now, so what I wanted to do is really try and break down the components here into the just what is the essential argument, what is the essential thesis, if you will, of the anti-right to work discussion here. And essentially, these advocates against right to work, they argue that these laws mean people are less likely to join a union, that there will be fewer, smaller, and or weaker unions, and that this will benefit the companies who are more likely to hire more people but at a lower wage. Okay, so that's part of it. They also point
Sure.
out that it is already federally protected to be able to choose whether or not to join a union without compulsion, and that employees do not have to pay dues for political causes, and therefore these right to work laws are pointless, right? Because they're essentially saying that the laws already protect the rights that are the main argument that right to work people are sort of making. And in
Right.
right to work states, it seems that the only difference between a right to work state and a non-right to work state is that unions are forced to represent and benefit employees in right to work states, but that employees do not have to meaningfully contribute to the union. They still get those benefits, which means that this stretches the union's budget just paper thin, and it forces the due paying members of the union to shoulder the financial and legal burden of all employees, which they often cannot do. Thus, the responsibility of the many ends up being carried out by the few, sometimes to the breaking point and shutting down that union altogether.
Right. So and so to be clear, because I think there's still a lot to unpack within that, right? To be clear,
Yeah.
what this is saying is essentially that because these right to work states have it set up or they basically have it set up so that there are people that will gain the benefits of the union without being in the union. The union in itself it already has finite resources, and it has finite resources because of the fee paying members of the union, the due paying members, right?
Yep.
So for every one person that's in the union, there are, let's say, 3, 4, 5 people that are choosing not to be in the union, which is fine, choose that. But that one person is shouldering the burden of making sure that those other 4 or 5 people reap the benefits of the union. Those people that are not paying dues are still gaining from not being
Right.
in the union.
And I think that then the what would happen in non-right to work states is that people could choose not to join the union, and then they just wouldn't get the benefits of the union. Um,
Right.
they just don't get all the sort of perks that come with being a due paying member. And so that's it. I had a really hard time really drawing a clear line there, but that was most consistently what I could find on both sides of the discussion, pro or against, that
Right.
the main difference in right to work is that people can benefit from the union without contributing to the union.
Right. So it may go without saying, but right to work laws are particularly favored by conservative politicians. But what's interesting about that is that conservative politicians tend to express a lot of anger and resentment toward policies that provide non-contingent support for people in principle because it means spending tax money on people who don't quote unquote deserve it. That is, the responsibility of many is carried by the few, like we just talked about. In that context, if the principal value is earned wages and proportionate wages for those who work harder, you would think the specific protection of the right to work to force of the right to work folks to force the organization to pay people who aren't contributing to be would be antithetical to conservatives. So their preference for right to work laws show that it is not the fact that it isn't fair for some people to receive benefits when they don't earn them. Instead, their value is whatever best protects the assets of the people who are already have the most.
Makes sense. I mean, just like trying to say here that like a lot of times there's a couple of steps. Like it tends to be conservatives who favor right to work laws, which is why you tend to see the most conservative states have right to work laws generally,
Right.
or the most libertarian states will have
Right.
those. Um, and what's interesting about it is that what these laws seem to do is enable freeloaders. Like that seems to be what they're specifically designed to do, is to enable
Right.
freeloaders, right?
Right.
And so, but what's antithetical about that is often the argument against welfare spending, against low income housing, against government for debt forgiveness, all the things that the government does that sort of supports people. They're sort of saying we can't spend tax dollars to support these people, and they don't even deserve it. Is what their
Right.
deserve being a very loaded word, but I think that that's essentially what is being implied is like they're not working, they shouldn't get unemployment. They're,
Right.
the fact that these things happen to them, bummer, bad things happen, but like that doesn't mean the rest of us should have to pay for it. That's sort of the thing. That there's no freeloaders, and yet this exact policy again seems to be tailor made to promote freeloading so that it will gut the power of the union. And if that's the case, then it says that their value actually isn't that they don't like freeloading. It is that what they like is that the people who have the most power get to keep the most power, because that's what those two different approaches will do, right? The one that says that people shouldn't get support when they're down is so that you can protect people who would be spending the money that have the resources to support those people. And
Right.
when that's not the case, then it's we don't want people to necessarily earn their money, because if they don't, even that if they don't get uh, set up so that they're paid more, that means the people who are at the top get to keep more of their money. So again, it's just
Right.
protecting power for the sake of protecting power.
Right. I mean, and that's, and again, this is part of the arguments against right to work that people make, right? I mean,
Right.
that is one of the talking points, is that exact thing, is that if 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 everybody benefits, then isn't that part of kind of like what they would describe in other places as handouts?
Right.
Right.
Exactly.
Like, I mean, that's kind of that's what they're kind of saying here. Now, states without right to work laws have and this is, again, this is under the cons of right to work laws. States without right to work laws have an umbrella effect where not only do the employees who work for the company that have unions, do they see higher wages, so do the employees who work for non-union companies. And so higher union participation states have benefits that extend to everyone, from safer work conditions to better benefits to higher salary, and everything in between. So essentially what they're saying is, in those places where most people are part of a union and the unions do have strength, the strength in the union also kind of bleeds out into other places where unions aren't present or people are not participatory in unions.
Awesome. All right. So this is a really good time to do a really quick pause, and
Okay.
I'll send you to if we can divide and conquer here, I'm going to send you to a website to read, and then I'm going to read from a similar website, but it's slightly different. And then it's only like a paragraph or two, so it should be fairly quick.
Sure.
So I sent you that in the chat. And because I want to do this part next, is the sort of implicit racist roots
Okay.
of right to work laws.
Yeah, that works for me. Fun stuff, man.
When was this written? Okay. Are you feeling good on this part?
Yeah, I feel pretty good about it.
Okay. Cool. Oh man, our time is gonna be way thrown off. All right, so we paused at about 43 minutes. So
Yeah.
plan. Okay, and it's now about 46 minutes. Okay. So we'll plan to in like 3-ish more minutes, do ads.
Yeah.
4 minutes maybe.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. Okay. All right, ready?
Yeah, let's do it.
Cool. Okay, there's another important piece of the discussion of rights to work that I think many people will see coming and many people maybe won't, but it's when you talk about why people do what they do, there is an unfortunate amount of racism and bigotry that creeps into like almost every conversation about
Uh-huh.
anything, right?
Yeah,
It is
especially in the US.
especially in the United States, where it's practically a sport in some states.
Yep.
And so anyway, the uh, the right to work laws, no different here. Important to discuss the sort of racist element in it. Now, it goes back to this Vance Muse guy that we were talking about before, and
Ooh.
this guy, I mean, and he was very sort of flamboyant in his not flamboyant in the sense that I think people would maybe associate with LGBT people, but flamboyant in the sense that he was very self-aggrandizing all the time. He
Sure.
was really proud of himself, called himself the best lobbyist in the country, etc. He formed all kinds of gigantic mega donor special interest groups that he started. And as we said, he specifically said, "I am for white supremacy." Now, he took this further. So in 1944, they were they were campaigning to pass right to work legislation in Arkansas, which did go through. And he had before this, he had fronted this Christian American Association, which was a front for wealthy special interest groups. It was basically just wealthy people who were sort of these special interest groups that were flying under the banner of Christianity to have public support, right? And they distributed all this literature to try and make their case for right to work, arguing that if their efforts did not go through, that quote, white women and white men will be forced into organizations, labor unions, with black African apes whom they will have to call brother or lose their jobs, end quote. So real piece of shit, this guy.
Yeah, I mean, and you know, it's not really a surprise. I mean, like when he was going when this was all going on, he was sending labor organizers to the South to kind of stir the flames and like stir up people. Like he was
Sure.
sending them down there to specifically like to flyer or pamphlet the town with all this information that was just like completely unfounded. And it ended up that some of the first right to work laws were enacted in 1944, around that time, 44 after after the Taft Hartley amendment. And so Arkansas and Florida were the first to adopt them.
Yeah.
Not surprised. But
Yeah.
even Martin Luther King actually had some stuff to say about this. So there's a really great quote here. In our glorious fight for civil rights, we must guard against being fooled by false slogans such as right to work. It is a law to rob us of our civil rights and job rights. Its purpose is to destroy labor unions and the freedom of collective bargaining by which unions have improved wages and working conditions for everyone. Wherever these laws have been passed, wages are lower, job opportunities are fewer, and there are no civil rights. End quote. That was from Martin Luther King in 1964 about
Wow.
this specific topic.
Wow. Um, there's I found this really interesting interactive map that also shows the adoption of right to work laws in the United States. I'm going to illustrate that in a second, but just to finish up really quick on this this Muse guy, he it will not come as a surprise to most people, given that we've described that he is a white supremacist. He is also anti-Semitic, I should say. He's not around anymore. And he had a lot of he fronted all these wealthy special interest groups to hide money and that sort of thing. He, of course, opposed women's suffrage. He worked to repeal child labor laws, and like the 8-hour day for railroaders, so basically making it so that they could be forced to work longer hours. He was active in the Committee for the Americanization of the Supreme Court, which was
Oh,
really just targeting a Jewish man named Justice Felix Frankfurter. And so he was a very active dude whose primary activities were to ruin as many people as he possibly could, particularly if they were not white men.
right, right. I mean, this guy was not going into this with any good intentions, it seems.
No, no. And so another part of this, because I think it's worth talking about, that the majority of places where unions exist, they're often blue collar jobs. Not always, but often blue collar jobs, which are people who generally make lower wages, who do not have a lot of education, who are doing a lot of like manufacturing and industrial work, and things that require a lot of physicality to them a lot of the time,
Right.
and that they can also entail some amount of exposure to dangerous chemicals depending on the job. There's lots of these types of jobs, and the people, if you tend to look at economic distribution, it tends to be the case that it is harder for people who are not white to see upward mobility, meaning that they gain more income, which means that the people who are not white tend to be more highly represented in blue collar work. And if you are weakening unions, then you are specifically weakening organizations where they have a large proportion of representation of people who are not white, because those are where those people tend to end up economically due to the system.
Right. So basically what we're saying is that this is just another example, it appears, of systemic racism at play that is actively and effectively harming large swaths of minority demographics. I mean, that's just ultimately what's happening here.
Right. So just a real quick summary of this interesting trend. So this was kicked off in the 1940s, as we said. 1947 was when that amendment passed. Immediately, these laws started going into place. So in the 1940s, in the 1940s you had 11 states kick off the right to work laws. It's like basically as soon as that amendment went into place, 11 states jumped on the bandwagon. After that, in 1150, you got about 11. After that, in the 1950s, you got about 6 more. In the 1960s, you got 1 more. In the 1970s, you got 1 more. So they really slowed down. In the 1980s, you get 1 more. They have 11 to kick off, 6 more, and then just 1 at a time for a few decades, 1 per decade, basically.
Sure.
In the 1990s, there were none. There were no states who adopted right to work legislation. In 2000s, there was 1 more, and then after 2010, 5 more states all of a sudden jumped on the bandwagon. After this trajectory of there having been, only 11 to begin with, then 6, then 1, then 1, then 1, then 0. and then 1, and then all of a sudden 5. It was like, what's going on? All of the sudden that there's this huge increase in all of these
Right.
states. And a lot of these, interestingly, are states that historically had a lot of really strong labor unions. Michigan being chief among them, as one of the leaders of states that had a lot going for it in terms of sort of protecting employees and people who had some of the highest standards of living because of all the car manufacturing plants that were there,
Right.
and that paid people really well. And then all of a sudden in the 2010s, there's this big flip.
So, I mean, it's super interesting to watch. Like this is I think why political science is so fascinating when you really get into it, is like these little events that have these like ripple effects that change everything, and kind of these ebbs and flows of social movements and what we find important, and how, as a political scientist, like as somebody who's interested in political science, how upsetting it is that most of these things don't ever follow actual data.
Right. Yeah, it's like we know, I mean, there is some amount of values that are embedded in like how you interpret these data, and I think that that's
Sure.
important, because sort of saying like, well, here's the outcome in states that have right to work laws that versus don't, among those sort of measurements we were talking about earlier, where you want to say, is this a good idea or not? And
Right.
whether or not it's good depends on sort of where you're coming from. So we can just dig into those exact data. So because most of this time we've really just been talking about what other people have said, whether they're for or against, what our arguments have been, and we haven't really necessarily weighed in with our opinion explicitly, though it certainly has colored a bit of it.
Sure.
But
Sure.
there are actual data. Unfortunately, there are also actual ads.
Nailed it.
A bit later than intended to, but that's okay.
That's okay. That's fine.
All right, we've been talking about well, racism recently, but as per
Of
usual, at
course.
some point it comes up. But like, what, there's all the arguments that people were making. What do the data actually say?
Right. So these data that we're going to talk about are come from multiple sources, so it is worth kind of unpacking that. But right to work states do tend to have a higher rate of employment across the state. So you are going to see higher rates of employment across that state that does have those right to work laws. Also, right to work states typically have lower union participation. So you have higher rates of employment, lower rates of union engagement.
And they were sort of saying the right to work is not pro or anti-union. That's what the pro right to work things say. And there was the one study that showed that in Oklahoma, at least, there was not a marked decrease in union participation after right to work laws went into place. But everywhere else there has been. Pretty much the that is the exception, not the rule. The rule is that union participation decreases in right to work states, which seems to have been largely the goal of the right to work. But sorry, that's not the data part.
Right.
That was just interpretation. Here's the data part. Right to work states do have lower wages than average, and non-right to work states do have higher wages than average. Of course, that is kind of inevitable when they both contribute to the average. Like, they're gonna pull
Sure.
apart once you look at those data
Sure.
streams. But they that means that, as we said earlier, every single place where non-right to work states have policies, they have higher wages, and in every single place where they have right to work policies, they have lower wages, which approximately $3 per hour difference in states with right to work laws.
I mean, that's a huge difference, I think.
I mean, and that's the average. Like, it can obviously be much more disparate than that, but I'd be willing to bet that because you have minimum wage, that's artificially preventing the bottom from going down as low as it probably could if you didn't have a
Right.
federally guaranteed minimum wage.
Right. Absolutely. Also another point that comes up is that right to work states do tend to have more jobs in the private sector than states that do not have right to work laws. So there are a higher number of private sector jobs in these right to work states.
And right to work states do tend to see corporations uh, more lucrative, I guess. They do better financially, economically. The larger corporations do better in those types of states. So again, there's the values here. Is it a good thing that those corporations do better? Is it a good thing that there are more jobs in the private sector? Like, those are going to depend on the values that you have going into it. But I think we can still share sort of our opinions about this.
Yeah, I have absolutely no problem sharing my opinion on this.
Okay.
I think that ultimately what I'm hearing in all of this discussion and some of the pro right to work arguments were that, oh, if companies don't have to pay for union stuff or be forced to spend money, then it'll go back to the employees. But that's just Reaganomics, right? That's trickle down where
Yeah.
it's not happening.
Yeah.
So what we're
Exactly.
seeing is those companies that are more financially profitable are also in those states that have lowest wages. So there is a discussion, I think, around that piece where, the right to a living wage, and the employee in general, I think should take kind of the forefront of the conversation. That person's wages, that person's safety, that person's benefits, all of those things. And typically those are managed and handled and bargained for within the union space. So I tend
Right.
to land on, overall, as a general rule, unions tend to be the good thing, and right to work states tend to discourage people away from unions. And
Right.
that ultimately, maybe not explicitly, but there is kind of an insidious kind of harm that happens long term, ultimately, I think.
Oh, and disproportionately affecting people who like need that support the most.
Absolutely.
Um, so yeah, I think where I want to come in at this, as I said, is I want to be nuanced. And I think communicating that my bias is generally pro union because unions tend to protect people, both their wages, their safety, kind of a lot of their benefits, a lot of ways are that unions, the reason they come to exist is to give people a way to advocate for themselves, and that
Right.
results in them getting a lot of benefits that they wouldn't have otherwise had. So there are
Yeah.
lots of really important critical discussions to get into unions, and where unions do things that I think are against anyone's values. And I
Right.
think that we should unpack unions and their by themselves at some other point. But I think on in general, the point being that unions are good. That's where my bias comes in.
Right.
But I think it's also difficult to say that someone should be forced to join a union as a condition of their employment. Like, I do
Right.
understand that being a concern. I can imagine if I worked somewhere where the union engaged in and represented activities and political orientations that were the opposite of mine, I wouldn't want to be forced to join that union, even if I
Right.
really, really wanted that job. And I would say I should have the right to not be forced to join that union. I do understand that point. I think that's a really important consideration there.
Right. I think in that point too, I think it's fair to understand that that person, whoever that person is that opts out of the union, opts out of having a representative come to the table and
Right.
bargain for them, opts out of like those types of things. And I think that's the thing that I keep going back to too. Is like if you don't want to be in a union, you shouldn't be forced to be in a union, but you also
Yes.
shouldn't get all of the like the rest of the union. I mean, I'm also very much so like a chaotic kind of person when it comes to stuff. I'm like, everybody should benefit no matter what. And I think that unions shouldn't, it shouldn't be this like complex an argument. And it would be a less complex argument if the wealth was shared down like people keep talking about it happening, but it's not happening like that. So I just keep landing on, no matter what your opinion is on unions or not, I think that we need to tax the rich more.
Oh, I've been
I mean,
thinking about doing an episode on
that's
that too. I think it'd be a really good
yeah,
mini.
yeah.
Because there's I was hearing something about there was a point in history in some European country where the rich were being taxed at like 90%.
Whew.
Um and which I mean people are going to hear that and like want to break something. But what was interesting about it is they had so much money that them being taxed at 90% meant that they still had more money than almost everyone else put together.
Right.
Like that's how unequally the wealth sort of existed and where it was distributed. And so that's anyway, I think it's a really interesting conversation to have inside of that. You're absolutely right. I think is that where my point on this would come down is that like if you don't want to join a union, fine. That just means you don't get to participate in the benefits of the union. There are some that you're going to get either way. Like if they've put in
Right.
safety precautions that make that so that like as part of that company's policy, they have to have these safety measures in place. Even if you're
Yeah.
not in the union, you'll benefit from that.
That's a good thing for
And
everybody.
exactly. Everybody wins in that situation. So like but you if you shouldn't get union representation if you have some grievance against your employer because you chose not to have that representation by saying you didn't want to be part of the union. And that's fine. Like you got those are the choices you're faced with, right? Like you just don't get to have your cake and eat it too. And the way that super bizarre saying works is like if
Right.
you can not both not participate and then also get all the benefits from it, you'll still get some inadvertently, like you
Yeah.
have to, but like the sort of the special ones that are more active, that you're not contributing to, I would just say like then you're just opting out of it, and that's fine.
Well, and I think the other side too is like I can hear the argument just from an accessibility standpoint where people will say, well, the union dues are so much, I can't afford union dues as part of my job. So I'm forced to opt out of union benefits and stuff. And I think that that's a conversation to be had too, as far as accessibility and making union dues affordable for people and making it easier to be in a union so that they can still, there's a lot to unpack there, that comes from like the social justice standpoint.
Sure.
And again, I don't know enough of the intricacies of that piece. I just know that whenever there's a discussion around, I have to pay money to get into a club. That's always a discussion of accessibility and
Yes.
living wages and stuff like that. So
Yeah, and you also don't know like what someone's circumstances like. They have a lot of debt, they have a lot of kids, they have a lot of medical bills, whatever that might be, that like what their income means to them is going to be different than it means to someone who doesn't have all those things, right?
right,
And not that I'm saying any company should be obligated to account for those explicitly, but just thinking about like what comes from participating in a union in a way that supports or doesn't support these
right,
employees, and they're just going to have different situations, so like factoring those into the conversation at least.
right, exactly.
Now, I also think with all of the things that I've said and that we've said is that like it already seems that people can't be forced to join a union, so there's relatively little issue like on that part of things.
Right,
um so I don't know. I mean, I think I do understand, I think, what the right to work legislation is trying to say, but how it's been, the way that it was set up right from the outset was problematic. This began as a way to like they were not shy about the fact that this was intended to try and weaken unions, right? They were specifically citing the fact that they wanted this legislation so that people wouldn't have to have mixed race groups inside of an
right,
employee. Like that's a problem. So I think that the it just seems like the right to work legislation. So one of the things that I think is important to say, though, sorry, that was a weird stream of consciousness, several transitions. Where I want to go with this is that both sides are a little disingenuous. Okay. And where I think the critics, the opponents of right to work, are disingenuous is they're trying to undermine the thesis that people should not be compelled to join a union by saying people already aren't compelled to join a union. Like they
right,
can't be. But I think where they're being disingenuous is I think that's because of the Taft-Hartley Act, which is
right,
the one that enabled right to unions to exist, right?
right,
And so I think that they're sort of trying to pretend that that's, or just obfuscate the fact that that's the reason that people are protected, while saying that like now we don't need these right to work laws because of that act or that amendment, and the amendment is the reason right to work laws happen. So that's where they're being disingenuous.
sure. I think it's fair.
And where I think the pro right to work people are being just disingenuous is kind of on the same side as theirs is, on the flip side of that coin, which is they're sitting here arguing, we think that we need to pass right to work laws so that people can elect to not participate in a union if they don't want to without any repercussions on their employment. And I'm like, yeah, that was covered in the Taft-Hartley amendment,
Right,
and if not already from the 1935 National Labor Relations Act. So like essentially you're sort of saying we need to have these laws to protect this while citing the law that protects it already.
right.
And so anyway, I think that's where they're both sort of being a little disingenuous with their arguments. This is not to say that they're wrong, just to say that like that's they're not sort of speaking the whole part of it.
Right, right, right. Yeah, it's not they're not using clarity or I mean it's just it's one of those things where it's like both sides are arguing an agenda. I mean, truly,
Yes,
when it comes to that.
very much so. Yeah, and that's clear. And so like I said, I think in general we're going to be in favor of things that are pro union, because I think we are pro union, and things that weaken unions then are not in line with things we're generally going to be in support of. And no matter how
Sure.
you choose to spin it, it seems like that the right to work legislation means less wages and weaker unions. And so that's why I think it's something that it doesn't make as much sense from someone who has the values that we have.
Right. 100%. I agree with you there.
One really quick thing. This was just something that I found in talking about this, because there's this union in some of the original the National Labor Relations Act. It specifically says in this act that an employer cannot engage in union busting activities. It can't like post propaganda, force people to attend seminars, like threaten people. It can't
Right.
yeah, it can't actually like fire people over their decision or the consideration of joining a union. So those things are illegal, and they 100% happen, like flagrantly happen a
Right.
lot in this country. So like it's also like that side is also not playing fair, like they're already breaking the actual law and then trying to like advocate for laws to make it easier for them to break the law, basically.
Right. Well, and a lot of times right to work laws will have embedded in them some type of way that allows there's some language around union busting techniques that make them quote unquote not union busting, when the truth is like they like employers can go, well, I'm just providing information. And it's
Right.
like, but you're doing it under the guise of like, you have to be at this meeting. Like, I'm going to present this information at this meeting that was not optional. You can do with this information what you will, but like
Yeah.
they've made it so that like those right to work, they it's almost like pork belly legislation, where it's like kind of like rolled into right to work stuff,
Yeah.
where they have legalized state specific union busting techniques.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's maybe shit, I had like a really good one in my mind and I forgot what it was. Lost it. It's gone.
It
Gone
happens.
forever. So I think there's generally a lot more to say about this topic. We just wanted to get into, and where I think this aligns with anything. I know we didn't get super into the sort of psychological weeds of things. I think it's what I wanted to point to is sort of where the agendas were. Like, what are the motives here? The people who have
Yeah.
right to work legislation, again, the motives are to protect companies. That's primarily it. And oh, so the one thing I was thinking also is to a lot of them say like in these right to work states companies do tend to do better, and they were also making the case like, well, because they're not dealing with unions, the companies have more money. What that means is, by not dealing with unions, is because companies aren't paying their employees as much and they're not investing in safety and workplace condition upgrades, or like
Or
higher
benefits.
standards. Yeah, then the company has more has more money, and they're like,
Right.
that's why they can hire more people cheaper. It's because they're paying more people less money, so they're getting more work for less money, and that of course is going to be in their best interest. So again, it's just these disingenuous bad faith arguments where they're
Yeah.
trying to sell you one thing while doing something different. And it's just I, not fair is the way to put it, but it doesn't quite capture it. It's like fucked up, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, because it's not providing all the information or being honest about the information that's out there. Like,
Yeah.
or I mean, even in the best scenario, the people that believe that companies will trickle down their money, like they truly believe that, but they have ignored every economics class, or just ignore humans who have resources, right?
Yeah.
Like at the end of the day, I think that's a really important thing, is like, on paper, they're like, well, yeah, companies can spend more money on this. And then the reality is that CEOs and higher leadership are reporting record profits for companies that have some of the worst working conditions. And you go, well,
Right.
why is that money not going back into the labor force, or the workforce? And it's not, because people don't do that. And so I think for that to be a talking point in the pro right to work discussion is so interesting that it stayed, given that we know that it doesn't happen.
Right. Yeah, and I think fuck, I had lost it again. Damn it. I get so enraptured in what you're saying.
Oh,
I'm so present.
I totally I do the same with you. It's a wonder that we get through these episodes.
Yeah. Um I think there's generally a lot more to say about, like I said, this. We sort of briefly touched on this topic, and I'm hoping at least that we did some amount of justice to unpacking the the nuances of the conversation. And again, being really transparent about the fact that because we're relatively pro-union, we're going to not necessarily look as our values are not going to reflect the values of something that is not also pro-union. And
Sure.
that I do also understand the problems with unions. And again, we do need to tackle those because they are not ubiquitously good. But I did
Right.
think part of the impetus of this conversation is because there were so recently so many new states adopting right to work legislation. We're in an election year, and so the conversations around this are happening a little bit more than they have been recently.
Right.
And also because we're coming out of a year of like a record-setting amount of major strikes that happened because of labor unions who organized to engage in collective bargaining, and when that didn't work out, then people stopped working. So there's a whole aspect of this that we're like, this happened in the public view in a really big way just in
Right.
2023, right? And so I think the idea of labor unions and legislation around right to work and all kinds of things that was kind of at the surface and at the top, and worth pointing out that it was kind of a unique time that we find ourselves. And when we talk about unions, it'll be worth also diving into the fact that part of the reason this happened is because during the pandemic, a lot of unions did relinquish some of their bargaining power, given that it was a different circumstance. And so there's
Right.
something to talk about inside of that as well. And that seems to have been part of the fuel that kicked off, that ignited these protests and strikes that happened.
Right. Absolutely.
Well, we've talked so long. This is one of our longer ones when I definitely thought it was going to be one of our shorter ones, but that's why I didn't say it was going to be shorter because I thought I'd jinx it, but it didn't help. Um,
It's a skill. It's a superpower.
so we should probably cap it here then, yeah?
Yeah, I think now's a good time.
All right, perfect. So hopefully we did as much justice as we can. If you'd like to reach out to us and tell us what we got boy, I can speak. What we got wrong, what we got right, etc. We like hearing from you. You can also reach us on the social media platforms. And speaking of which, if you'd like to support us, you should go over there and tag us, leave a rating and review, subscribe, share us with a friend. You can go to our website to pick up some merch if you'd like to do that. If you join us on Patreon, you get all kinds of bonus goodies and things that are delicious. And that includes a super group of people who are fantastic, who are so generous, and we really appreciate them, which is Mike M, Megan, Layla, Mike T, Justin, Kim, Joshua, Brad, Stephanie, Olivia, Brian, and Ashley. Thank you all so much for your continued support of our show.
So much love your way.
Also, thank you to my team without whom I could not do this podcast. Thank you for recording with me today, Shane. Um,
Anytime.
our writers and fact checkers are Shane and myself. Our social media coordinator is Emma Wilson. Our audio production, amazing, magical sound, make a sound good guy is Justin. And then of course, thank you all my listeners. Thank you for being here.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so great. It's so without you, we would not be.
Yes. All right.
Sine
So
qua non, right? Without which it could not be.
Semper Fi. I don't know what that means.
No, that's a different thing.
Okay. Anyway, we actually aren't completely done yet because whether or not you were joining us for the first time or you've been with us for a while, we have a little tradition here that we plug at the end of our episodes where we like to recommend something that we found joyful recently or just that was at the forefront of our mind. So let's get to some recommendations.
Let's do that.
Okay, I am recommending a book. I actually don't remember if I've recommended this book recently. Have I recommended this yet, Shane?
We talked about this book, but I don't think that you recommended this book recently.
Okay. All right. I actually finished reading this book in December. It was after we recorded our year wrap-up episode, so it wasn't on that list, but I've been thinking about it ever since, and I kind of just want to read it all over again because I liked it so much. It
That's
was
great.
that good. And this is a book called Project Hail Mary. This is by
Okay.
author Andy Weir, that people will most likely know from The Martian. He wrote the
Uh-huh.
book that turned into the movie. He wrote another book called Artemis, which was
Which was
also a lot of
great.
fun. Yeah. And he tends to do what I would call hard sci-fi. So he takes a fictional scenario that hasn't happened, and he has the main characters, navigate that scenario using a lot of science, like
Right.
existing known science. But there are, of course, major fictional elements that are built in, like um, some
Moon bases.
some moon bases, or someone who is stranded on Mars, who has never, like humans, have never been to Mars. So there's, an element of that sort of thing. But
Sure.
I don't want to give very much away on this book. It's like, even setting up the premise, it kind of caught me off guard because I didn't know anything going in, and so I kind of like that for other people. Um, I will say that if you've read Andy Weir's other stuff, the problem solving element is the same. So, like, major scientific thing happens, smart person needs to use science to alleviate that issue,
Sure.
as being sort of the general description of it. That's all stays about the same. Um, this one took a very different turn than I was expecting it to. Again, not knowing anything going into it. And I think is maybe his best book. And The Martian was
Wow.
maybe my favorite book before this. So I'm very torn between the two, but this one was so good. Or at least I loved it. So if you're into hard sci-fi, you could do a lot worse than Project Hail Mary by author Andy Weir.
Yeah, he definitely takes a page out of the Asimov storytelling where it's like very
Yes.
hard sci-fi and stuff like that. Like, so
Yes.
if you're like, it's not like I mean, Philip K. Dick has a little bit of it, but it's more fantastical. So like,
Yeah.
if you like hard sci-fi, like Asimov stuff, like you'll dig it. I mean, I've read both The Martian and Artemis, and they're both incredible.
Yeah.
So I'm really excited to read this one.
Cool. Yeah, good. So that's my recommendation.
I love it. My recommendation is a video game. So, yesterday I took my son to GameStop. He got a gift card for his birthday, and he picked out this video game, that was Ghostbusters, the video game remastered. And it is, I remember I've loved Ghostbusters my entire life. Like, I can't think of a time where I haven't. I think that that's like applying science to supernatural phenomenon. I think is always really fascinating.
Yeah.
So they put out this game a few years ago and they remastered it. And this game is you are a Ghostbuster who has joined the Ghostbusting team with the original cast. So the original cast produced it, wrote it, and they voiced everybody in it.
Okay.
So and you are a Ghostbuster in New York, like doing Ghostbuster things. You're trapping ghosts, you're firing the proton pack. It's so much fun.
Wow.
And it's like the best Ghostbusters game experience that you could possibly have. Like, you get to be a Ghostbuster, you get to use the equipment, you get to bust ghosts. Like, how could you not how could you want more?
And what platform is this on?
So it's across multiple platforms. We have it on the Switch.
Okay, got you.
So
Um, awesome. Well, that sounds like a lot of fun. I think I would. I tend to also really like Ghostbuster content, and the idea of running around being a Ghostbuster in New York just fills me with joy. Just the idea of it just fills
yeah.
me with joy.
Yeah.
So
It's so fun.
that's really lovely.
It's so good.
Awesome. Well, as I said, if you'd like to talk to us about the right to work legislation or unions, if you would like to talk to us about some books or video games that you've played recently that you really like, or if you've read Project Hail Mary or played the Ghostbusters video game and want to weigh in, we love hearing from everybody. Email us directly, info@wwdpodcast.com, or reach out to us on the other social media platforms. Shane, is there anything I am forgetting or that you would like to add before we wrap up today?
Nothing else here.
All right, then that is it. This is Abraham.
This is Shane.
We're out.
See ya.
We
All right.
This is such a long one. I'm sorry. I
I
got so
know, but it
rambly.
was good. No, it was good though. I thought it was one of our better ones. So
Oh, good.
I do enjoy having long chats with you. So
Same. And our AI summary thing.
this is episode 352, right?
352 is what I have, yes.
Okay.
Um, it kind of feels, I don't know. It kind of feels good to just get a little more on the logical, ranty side of things.
Yeah, because I think there's a lot of discussion in that wouldn't happen in
Yeah.
other spaces.
Well, and I think that, I want to be really fair to like the people who are again, you might be someone who's like, I really want to be a teacher. And so you go out and you're like, I don't want to join the teachers union because I don't like that they protect shitty teachers.
Right.
And so then you're like, okay, I'm like, go be a teacher that's not in the teachers union. That sounds perfectly great. Like if something happens and you like don't have union, like you won't have union representation, so you'll have to get your own lawyer, but like that is a lot of people in a lot of situations. So maybe that's fine for you. Um, but yeah, like I think that was sort of it is exactly is just like you shouldn't get the benefit like you're going to get some benefits of the labor union. They'll
Right.
probably force the company to establish a minimum wage that applies to anybody no matter what that you will then get, but you don't get someone to argue on your behalf for grievances. You don't get someone who's going to represent you in bargaining. Like I think if they negotiate a wage for union members, that applies only to union members, and that's something that you have opted to do as a
Right.
person who's like, I will, instead of paying union dues, I will not take a raise.
Right. Right.
And like that was the choice he made. So I'm like, fine, like make that choice. I don't care, do whatever you want. But they shouldn't get those benefits if they're not going to participate in the union.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot, and I think that's where maybe when we do that episode on unions, it'll be really fun to unpack all of that because I do think that that's
Yes.
so necessary to like dive into.
Yeah, and I think as we said, talking about how they gave up some of the bargaining power and digging into some of the corruption that has happened in unions, like it's a complicated topic, which is why it makes it a good topic.
Yeah, exactly. It's fun.
So, but anyway, I know we're a little bit long, so we can jump out of this.
No worries. Bye, patrons.
Bye, patrons.
See you soon.